Welcome friends, welcome to another video. I am David Dee, this is PRM. And the Democratic debates, the last Democratic debates of 2019 were last night, and they were a doozy. So we're going to go over that today with a primary focus on Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang, who I believe, I have a bias, I'm aware of that, but I believe they had the best night last night. Even in spite of the bias, the overwhelming bias that was given towards Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, especially Amy Klobuchar. If I was just some random American tuning in last night, I would have thought Amy Klobuchar was the front runner. If I've never seen a poll, I'm not really in the loop. I'm not a political junkie. If I just tuned in out of nowhere, I would have guessed that Amy Klobuchar, by how much time they gave Amy Klobuchar last night, that she was the front runner. I don't know who she knows at the network. I don't know what kind of strings she had to pull to garner that much attention, but someone gave her an exceptional amount of attention that she didn't deserve. Amy Klobuchar isn't even polling at 2 or 3 or even 4% most of the time. The only person who seems to like her is Bill Maher. That's where we're at with it. That's all I can gather from Amy Klobuchar. But last night, she ended up getting like second most time out of anybody in the 2.5 hour thing. It was ridiculous. Bernie was largely ignored for the first hour. He had a good second hour. But they really tried to keep the focus on Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, and it was just obvious. So obvious they were doing that. And here's another thing. PBS's bias was so present in their intro, they didn't even mention Bernie Sanders. They would take these breaks every half hour, 45 minutes or whatever. During those breaks, Bernie Sanders' name was not mentioned once. Yang was mentioned once, which blew my mind. But Bernie Sanders wasn't even talked about, wasn't at all discussed. They were busy propping up Amy Klobuchar, once again, Pete Buttigieg, and all these other people who just don't matter. Disgusting, absolutely disgusting display of bias by PBS. Of all corporations, you would think PBS would have the least amount of bias. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive, but I'm just saying PBS has shown some of the most vicious bias against Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang. Amazing. So I'm going to go over my notes. I jotted down a bunch of notes. We'll see what we can gather here. Okay, so Bernie, his voice was very strong. I'm going to start very minimal. His voice was very strong. I know his voice has been struggling in the past. You can tell he rested his voice. His tone was strong. His presence was good. Just going on the lighter things, he had a good debate. Just on physical appearance and sound, because he suffered a few times. He talked about the new NAFTA deal. He said it's only modest improvements. He said it's not going to stop outsourcing of jobs. He said climate change isn't even mentioned once in this new NAFTA bill. Very important point here. He said he will not be voting for this new NAFTA bill. And then he talked about declaring a national emergency on climate change. Here's what I've come to realize. Bernie Sanders is the climate change candidate in the race. I think he has the best plan. I think he has the best rhetoric. I really think out of all those people up there, and in the race, he is the climate change candidate. Once again, I know I have Bernie bias, but I don't hear anybody speaking as strongly as Bernie Sanders when it comes to climate change. Israel was brought up, and Bernie Sanders is Jewish, as most of you know. He said Israel has a right to exist in peace and security, but the Palestinians do as well. He called Benjamin Netanyahu a racist. And he is. He's very racist. And Bernie said his foreign policy would focus on human rights and would be democracy focused. It's kind of vague, but it's a good template. to start with. So more details, hopefully, about that. Sanders was quick to mention he has no billionaires supporting him. He is the only candidate in the race that is not being supported by billionaires. Very important point. Most of his donations are $18 roughly, and he has the most donations out of any candidate in U.S. history from what he's touting here. Just amazing. He called out Joe and Pete on their billionaire supporters. He said Joe had 44 billionaires, and Pete Buttigieg has 39. And he talked about Pete. You got some catching up to do. I thought that was funny. So that was good that he pointed out Pete as being propped up. Let's see. Day one, he said he would, put DACA through bipartisan legislation for all 11 million DACA recipients. Day one, he's on that. The progressive agenda he focused on was Medicare for all, fight for 15, free college, cancel all student debt, Green New Deal. A lot of these were touched upon. Trans rights. Bernie Sanders supports the Equality Rights Act. And he made a point about his Medicare for all being intrinsically tied to trans rights. So any medical necessities that trans Americans need would be in the framework of Bernie's Medicare for All plan. So that's cool. Let's see. Medicare for All. Let's see. 87. He talked about how 87 million people are underinsured or uninsured in America. And he said, and there was a controversy about getting Medicare for All passed. Like, can you do it with Republicans? Can you really get this passed? And he said he guarantees he will get it passed within the first year in office. And I believe that because the polling is good for Medicare for All with Republicans. Over 50% of Republicans support Medicare for All. I believe him when he says that. And he nailed Joe Biden on his failed vision for healthcare. Joe Biden has been failing at healthcare since he started with Obama. It failed in the public option. Obamacare has been a nightmare. Republicans haven't helped, but Joe Biden is a failure on healthcare. We all know that. And Bernie also talked about how his Medicare for All is no co-payments, no deductibles, no premiums, which is just fantastic. Let's see. He plans on tackling the greed and the corruption of the insurance companies and prescription drug companies. And I wrote down, I was fist pumping. Like I get pumped when Bernie speaks. Like I was just fist pumping after hearing that. Like he nailed his rhetoric. So good night for Bernie Sanders. First hour was weak. Second hour was very strong. I'm going to move on to Andrew Yang here. Andrew Yang also had a fantastic night. Definitely, wow. If I had to make a top three, Bernie and Andrew Yang were in the top three. Okay, Andrew Yang just had a great night. He talked about 4 million manufacturing jobs were the real reason why Trump was elected. I think this is a very important talking point. How automation, not immigrants, are the problems that have led to Trump's rise. And a lot of Americans aren't getting that. I love this talking point. It needs to be said over and over. Andrew Yang called for us to stop being over-obsessed with impeachment, and we need to solve the problems that got Donald Trump elected in the first place. There was a pro-nuclear power segment, and I like this because I'm kind of pro-nuclear power. It's definitely, it has one of the lowest carbon footprints, okay? But it's a matter of storing it is the only problem. And Andrew Yang actually he had a good pro-nuclear argument, and he was also for thorium, which no one knows about. But he actually brought that up, so hopefully we hear more about that. But he said, quote, "We need nuclear on the table." It's just fully agree. Let's see. The freedom dividend got woven into the framework when reparations came up. I believe he was asked about reparations. He started talking about MLK and tying in the freedom dividend. Some people have said that's pretty thin. It's a thin, I don't know. I think it's kind of thin. But you can see it as a starting point. I see it as a starting point. I guarantee you some African Americans would say it's not enough, but it's a good place to start. If I had to bet, that's what I think they would say. Let's see. China came up. He said China is beating us in data resources. We need to outcompete them. So he was pretty strong on China. And I think he has been the last few debates. He's been very good on his foreign policy with China. DACA was brought up, very pro-DACA. Talked about being the son of immigrants. Why would he not be for DACA? He said that would be a top priority for him within the first 100 days. And there was another section about, once again, how immigrants are scapegoated in this country. And they are. So many Trump supporters hate immigrants because Trump has lied to them and said they are at fault. And I love how Andrew Yang once again brings up the 4 million manufacturing jobs lost to automation are the real reason those jobs are gone. It's not because of immigrants. We all know tyrants scapegoat immigrants. They always have, they always will. And if Andrew Yang can keep talking about this to change hearts and minds, it's going to be good. So, I had some other notes. I'm not even going to go over them. The video's getting kind of long. But Andrew Yang and Bernie Sanders had a great night. PBS is horrible. The bias was out of this world. I was losing my mind. I was really angry. I was viscerally angry at what PBS was doing to Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang. They're scared. They're scared of these populist and progressive candidates that are a threat to their corporate candidates. We got to keep fighting for them. Let's fight for Bernie Sanders. Let's fight for Andrew Yang. Let me know what you guys think. Do you have any comments about last night's debates? Like, share, subscribe, click the bell, and I'll meet you down in the comments.